My son sat at the lawyer's table wearing that smug grin of his, already convinced I would walk away empty-handed from his mother's $45 million fortune. He thought the whole inheritance was his to enjoy. But when the attorney cleared his throat and read a single, short sentence, the color drained from Ryan's face. That smirk vanished, and he erupted in a scream so fierce it rattled the office walls. Before I take you any further, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The story for me began, not in a lawyer's office, but in my own cramped kitchen. I dropped my coffee cup, watched it explode into jagged pieces across the linoleum, just as Mrs. Henderson's voice tore through the thin wall separating our apartments. "Michael! Your damn sprinklers are drowning my begonias again." On my knees with a dish towel, I started blotting up the spreading puddle. 66 years old and still cleaning up after things that weren't entirely my fault. That sprinkler system I installed last month had one loose joint, a temperamental piece that sent water spilling into her flower bed every third day. I had tried explaining the fix-it schedule, but patience had never been one of Marjorie Clark's virtues. The phone rang. I ignored it, focused on the coffee soaking into the grout, while her voice droned on, something about property values and inconsiderate tenants. But the ringing cut through her complaints. First ring, second, third. By the fifth, I sighed, tossed the wet towel into the sink, and answered. "Michael Hartman speaking. Mr. Hartman, this is Karen Doyle, from Doyle & Carter LLP in Austin." Her voice had that clipped, professional tone, measured and cautious, the kind I'd come to know always preceded bad news. "I'm calling regarding Claudia Elizabeth Hartman." My grip on the receiver tightened. Nobody had said her full name in front of me for 14 years. "What about her?" "I am so sorry to inform you, sir. Mrs. Hartman passed away Friday evening. The funeral will be this Monday at 2 o'clock at Trinity Memorial Chapel." The word struck like a hammer to the chest. I collapsed into the kitchen chair, its familiar creak echoing in the silence that followed. Tuesday evening. 3 days ago. 3 days I had been fretting about broken sprinklers and spilled coffee while she was gone. "Mr. Hartman? Are you there?" I am here." My own voice sounded strange, far off, as though it belonged to someone else. "How did you get my number?" "Your name was listed in her personal effects, marked as emergency contact." "I understand you were once married." "Once married." 22 years of life together, reduced to a cold legal phrase. "Yes." "Divorced in 2011. The answer rolled out automatically, words I had filled into too many forms. "Well, there will be a reading of the will after the service. You are named as a beneficiary. Your presence would be appreciated." Beneficiary? The word felt foreign, heavy. Claudia had built her empire long after we split, turning the little consulting outfit she started in our garage into something the newspapers wrote about. What could she possibly have left for me? "Will you attend, Mr. Hartman?" Through the window, I could see Marjorie Clark glaring at her soggy begonias, hands on her hips like a general ready for battle. Her world seemed muffled now, far away, unimportant. "The chapel," I managed. "Which one did you say?" "Trinity Memorial Chapel on Elm Street. Service at 2, reception after. The will reading at 4:30 in our downtown office." I found myself nodding though she could not see me. "I will be there." When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the receiver as if it might ring again and tell me a different story. The coffee stains were already setting into the linoleum, but I could not bring myself to move. Could not absorb the truth that Claudia, stubborn, brilliant, impossible Claudia, was gone. Sunlight angled through the window, dust motes spinning like tiny memories I had spent years trying to bury. And in my head, the name, Claudia Elizabeth Hartman, echoed with every syllable pulling me backward. Back to 1987, Bluebonnet Cafe, on a snowy February evening. I had been eating apple pie when I first saw her. She was wrapped in a red wool coat, her voice carrying across the room like a trumpet. "You are telling me you will not consider female applicants for weekend manager because women cannot handle pressure?" The poor manager sputtered excuses while she leaned forward, eyes flashing. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have heard all week." I stopped mid-bite, fork suspended, watching her profile, those sharp cheekbones, that determined jaw, dark hair glinting under fluorescent lights. Magnificent, fierce, impossible to ignore. "Ma'am, I did not mean any offense." "Of course, you did not mean offense. You just meant to discriminate." She slid a card across the counter. "When you are ready to hire based on qualifications rather than prejudice, call me." The bell above the door jingled as she stormed out, and suddenly the diner felt smaller, drained of its spark. I watched her climb into a blue Honda Civic, noting how carefully she checked her mirrors before pulling into traffic. She was deliberate in the way she moved through life, measured, careful, but never afraid to raise hell when the moment demanded it. "That one's trouble," the manager grumbled loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. I stood up, tossed a $5 bill by my half-eaten pie, and said something I had not expected to come out of my own mouth. "No. That one's not trouble. That one's extraordinary." The card she had left behind sat abandoned on the counter. Claudia Chen, business consultant. I memorized the number before stepping out into the biting February wind. It took me 3 whole days to build up the courage to dial it. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring, sharp and to the point. "Claudia Chen. This is Michael Hartman. We haven't met, but I saw you at Bluebonnet Cafe last Friday night." There was a pause before her voice softened, touched with amusement. "The man with the apple pie. The one who called me extraordinary. I was in the parking lot getting my gloves, but I heard it. You also left a generous tip." I could practically hear her smiling. "So, Michael Hartman, what exactly can I do for you? How about dinner? Somewhere better than Bluebonnet?" Another pause, this one longer. "Is this a date request, or are you fishing for business advice?" "Definitely a date. Though if you've got tips on persuading remarkable women to accept dinner invitations, I'd gladly pay for the consultation." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that rang true, not the polite chuckle people toss out of obligation. "Saturday night," she said finally. "The Magnolia Grill on Magnolia Avenue. 7 o'clock. She arrived wearing that same red coat, but underneath it was a black dress that made my pulse jump. We sat for 3 hours, talking about everything but work, her childhood in San Antonio, my long days at the power station, the way we both loved old movies but were still curious about new books. When she laughed at my story about nearly flooding my apartment while trying to fix a leaky faucet, I knew I was a goner. 6 months later, I asked her to marry me right there at Bluebonnet, sliding a ring across the same counter where she had once dropped her business card. "Marry me, Claudia Chen. Make me the luckiest man in Texas." She said yes before I could finish the question. Our wedding day glowed under a September sky, the kind of weather that feels like a promise. She wore her grandmother's gown, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers we had picked ourselves that morning. My hands trembled slipping the ring onto hers. "Forever," she whispered. And I believed it. Ryan arrived 2 years later, red-faced and wailing, a miracle that filled our quiet home with new life. I remember standing in that hospital room, watching Claudia cradle our son with the same fierce determination she used in every part of her life, and thinking, this moment right here is all I will ever need. But even then, as she rocked our newborn, I caught her eyes drifting now and then toward the business magazine on the nightstand. Time passed. Ryan went from a toddler with sticky fingers to a boy ready for school, and I began noticing things I had missed in the haze of those early years. When he turned 7, Claudia bought him a computer. Not a toy, a real machine worth more than I made in a month. "He needs to understand technology," she told me, watching him navigate programs I did not even recognize. "The future belongs to kids who can think digitally." I suggested taking him fishing instead. She laughed, though not in a way that made me feel good. By then we had moved into the big house on Preston Road. 3 bathrooms, a kitchen island larger than our entire first apartment. Claudia's consulting firm had just landed a contract with a mining consortium, and suddenly money flowed into our lives like water from a broken dam. A housekeeper showed up twice a week. Our refrigerator spat ice cubes from the door. Ryan's room looked like a showroom for the latest gadgets. "Isn't this wonderful?" Claudia asked one evening, her arms stretched out in our gleaming dining room under a chandelier that could seat a dozen beneath it. I missed our old wooden table, the one covered in the scars of Ryan's coloring projects and the burn marks from our late-night talks. This new table reflected fingerprints like a mirror, a surface too perfect to touch without coasters and placemats. Soon the dinner parties began, business partners, prospective clients, polished couples who talked only in terms of investments and market share. I would wear my best shirt and sit there, nodding, trying to follow conversations about hedge funds and corporate restructurings that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. "Michael works at the power station," Claudia would say when asked, and there was something new in her voice. Not pride. Something closer to embarrassment. Meanwhile, Ryan thrived in that world. At 10, he could talk computer code with Claudia's colleagues. By 12, he was critiquing wine lists at restaurants I could not afford on my own. At 14, he rolled his eyes at my suggestion of a camping trip, preferring instead to tag along with his mother on business conferences in Dallas or Houston. "Dad doesn't understand," he would mutter, his favorite line, always with that weary sigh, as though he were some worldly sage forced to humor a clueless old man. The first big fight came on his 16th birthday. Claudia had planned an affair that looked more like a corporate event than a party for a teenager: catered food, professional entertainment, guest lists full of business associates and their kids. I had wanted something simpler. A barbecue out back with his school friends. "This is embarrassing," I told her the night before, watching servers carry in flowers so elaborate they looked like they belonged at a wedding. "He's 16, not 50. He's growing up in a different world than we did, Michael," she replied, adjusting a centerpiece with the precision of a surgeon. "These connections matter. These connections will shape Ryan's future," Claudia said with that clipped certainty of hers. "What about just being a kid?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, met my eyes, and for a flicker of a moment I saw something unsettling: calculation where there used to be warmth. "Being a kid is a luxury, Michael. It is not one we can afford to give him. The world is brutal. Either we prepare him to win, or we set him up to lose." Her words hit me like cold water. I thought back to my own 16th birthday, fishing with my dad on a quiet lake, a lopsided cake my mom baked, gifts wrapped in newspaper comics. Simple. Perfect. Enough. By her standards, Ryan's 16th birthday party was a triumph. He dazzled her business friends with adult-like conversation, their kids handed him expensive presents, designer clothes, high-tech gadgets, even a mountain bike worth more than some used cars. But in the middle of all that sophistication, I caught him once standing alone near the pool, shoulders slumped, eyes searching. "You all right, buddy?" I asked gently. He straightened instantly, slipping back into the polished persona his mother had trained him to wear. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? But I had seen it, the vulnerable boy hiding under the performance. And it broke something in me. That party was the start of the unraveling, though I could not name it then. What followed was 10 years of slow-motion collapse, like watching a landslide from the bottom of the mountain. You knew it was coming, you knew it would destroy, and still you could not stop it. Claudia's work devoured her. Weekends disappeared into conference calls. Family dinners were interrupted by buzzing phones. Vacations were cancelled for client emergencies. Every little league game, every school concert, every moment that should have belonged to Ryan was weighed against a meeting or a deal, and the deals always won. "You do not understand the pressure I am under," she would snap when I complained. "This business is what holds up our lifestyle. Somebody has to make the hard choices." I did understand pressure. The kind that came from making sure the power grid stayed alive, that lights flicked on when people hit a switch, that hospitals did not lose power mid-surgery. My pressure served others. Hers served ambition. By the time Ryan walked across the stage at high school graduation, he was a stranger to me. Claudia had molded him into her perfect protégé, sharp, ambitious, dismissive of anything that did not advance his future. When I suggested trade school along with college applications, his look of disgust cut deeper than any knife. "Dad, that kind of thinking is exactly why you stayed stuck. You settled for mediocrity. I am not going to repeat your mistakes." 17 years old and already talking like a consultant. Those words knocked the breath from me. Mediocrity. As though 25 years of keeping an entire community's lights burning meant nothing. As though being a father who showed up every night was shameful. College only widened the canyon. He chose Claudia's alma mater, a business school, and came back for holidays armed with theories about market trends and optimization strategies. He looked at our home with thinly veiled contempt. "You could have done more, Dad," he would say, like my steady life was a personal failing. "Mom started from nothing and built an empire. You have been at the same job for 20 years. Some things matter more than money," I would reply, but by then he was already checked out, eyes on the next deal. The final explosion came his senior year. Claudia was grinding through a 100-hour work week on some acquisition deal. I was the one handling everything at home: groceries, laundry, bills. Life's glue. When she missed Ryan's graduation for a client, I finally snapped. "This is enough, Claudia. Family has to come first sometimes." She stood in our kitchen, our gleaming, granite and crystal showroom of success, still in her business suit at midnight, scrolling emails with her thumb. "Do not you dare lecture me on priorities. Everything we have, everything Ryan has achieved, exists because of my work. And what about everything we lost?" I shot back. "Like what?" She finally looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Like us. Like being a family, instead of a corporation." She stared at me, eyes flat and distant. In that silence, I had my answer before she even spoke. We are not a family anymore. We are a business arrangement that has run its course. Maybe it is time to stop pretending. The divorce chewed through 6 months of my life. Her lawyers were sharp, precise, merciless. I walked away with the small house on Oak Street, the one we had once rented out, and just enough money to keep afloat. She took everything else, including Ryan's loyalty. "You are holding him back, too," Ryan told me in one of our last conversations before he packed for Dallas to work at her company. "Your obsession with simple living and family values, it is toxic. I cannot be around it." Then he was gone. I sat in that empty house surrounded by boxes of photographs and relics from a life that suddenly meant nothing to either of them. 14 years later, I sat in my little apartment. The afternoon light slanted low through the window. My coffee had gone cold. The broken ceramic shards from the cup still littered the floor where they had fallen. And the silence pressed in. Somewhere across town, people were ironing black suits and arranging flowers for the funeral of the woman who once swore she'd love me forever. And I still had no idea why she'd left my name in her will after all these years. The 3 days between Karen Doyle's phone call and the funeral blurred together. Time felt thick, like I was moving through syrup. I cleaned my apartment twice over, pressed my one decent suit until the fabric looked stiff, and rehearsed conversations in my head that I knew would never actually take place. Every morning I thought about staying home. Every evening, I found myself deciding I'd go anyway. Pay my respects, no matter what. Monday dawned gray and raw, Texas spring at its most unforgiving. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, fingers clumsy around a tie I hadn't worn in half a decade. The man staring back at me was older than the one I felt inside, hair silvered, eyes tired, lines carved deep across my face like a road map of quiet disappointments. The drive to Trinity Memorial Chapel took 20 minutes, winding me through Fort Worth, patchwork of lives. First my modest block of apartments, then rows of cookie-cutter homes with 2-car garages, and finally into the land of manicured lawns and stone facades where Claudia's people lived now. The chapel itself sat on a hill, Gothic arches clawing at the gray sky, a monument to permanence and money. The circular drive glittered with status, Mercedes lined up beside BMWs, Teslas parked like trophies. I pulled my dented Toyota between a Lincoln and a Cadillac, the outsider at a club I didn't belong to. Inside, money spoke louder than grief. Stained glass painted colored light across mahogany pews. Flowers had been arranged with such precision it looked more like an art exhibit than mourning. At least 200 people filled the space, their voices weaving together in a low hum of sadness mixed with professional networking. I recognized a few faces from long-ago business dinners, but most were strangers from the empire Claudia had built after I was gone. I slipped into a pew near the back, hoping to vanish into the woodwork. But whispers followed me anyway. A woman in an expensive black suit leaned toward her companion and gestured subtly in my direction. I caught a few words as their gossip reached me. Her ex-husband, can you believe he showed up, after everything he put her through? Over the years, I'd learned to live with that story, the one where I was the small man who held back a brilliant woman. Villains make tidy explanations, and I'd been cast in that role for so long I'd stopped trying to rewrite it. Then I heard it. Dad. The single word cut through the hum like a blade. I looked up and saw Ryan striding down the aisle. At 38, he carried Claudia's sharp cheekbones and commanding presence like armor. His suit fit like it was tailored by someone who charged more than my rent. An expensive watch gleamed on his wrist, his hair trimmed with precision. He radiated success, confidence, certainty. Everything his mother had wanted for him. "What are you doing here?" His voice carried across the chapel, sharp enough to draw every head. Conversations stilled. Eyes turned. I rose slowly, steadying myself against the pew. "I came to pay my respects. You lost that right 14 years ago." He closed the distance between us until I could smell his cologne, something sharp, sophisticated, aggressive. "She wouldn't want you here." "Maybe not," I admitted quietly. "But I needed to be here." "For what?" His words were coated with contempt. "To ease your guilty conscience? To pretend you're some grieving widower for people who actually know what kind of husband you really were?" The chapel had gone utterly silent. 200 pairs of eyes locked on us, waiting for the spectacle to unfold. I could feel that old familiar weight, the judgment, the suffocating pressure I'd lived under in those last years of our marriage. But this time was different. I had nothing left to lose. "I am not here to cause trouble, Ryan. I will sit in the back. I will not speak to anyone. And when the service ends, I will leave. You will leave now." His voice rose, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, drawing murmurs of approval from the crowd. "You embarrassed her enough while she was alive. Do not add insult by pretending to grieve now." I stayed on my feet, holding his stare, refusing to flinch. Around us, the chapel felt like an arena. Someone coughed nervously. A phone buzzed against polished wood. Before I could answer, Ryan pivoted to address the mourners directly, his voice polished and commanding like the keynote speaker he'd become. "I apologize for this disruption during a service meant to honor my mother." His arm swept toward me in a gesture of dismissal, like I was a pest he was brushing aside. "My father seems to have forgotten that divorce severs family ties." A few heads nodded. I caught whispers of agreement. Heat crept into my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. "For those unaware," Ryan continued, growing stronger with every word, "this is Michael Hartman. He is the man who spent 24 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this town has ever known. While my mother was building an empire that gave jobs to hundreds, he was content to punch a time clock and drag her down with complaints about her ambition." "Ryan," I snapped, my voice carrying harder than I expected. He paused, eyes narrowing, but his expression said everything. He wasn't finished. Ryan pivoted back to the audience like a prosecutor making his closing arguments. His words cut sharp and clean. He drained half her assets in the divorce while contributing nothing to her success. And then he spent 14 years painting himself as some kind of victim while she built greatness out of nothing. The congregation leaned in now, feeding on his performance. I spotted familiar faces, old neighbors, people I once laughed with over backyard barbecues, but none of them would meet my eyes. "She carried him for years," Ryan pressed on, while he clung to the safe path, never taking risks, never giving her the partner she deserved. "And now that she's gone, he shows up here, expecting sympathy, expecting to matter." Every sentence landed like a fist. Not because they were entirely false, but because he'd reduced 24 years of marriage, love, struggle, small victories, heartbreak, into a cheap morality tale. Husband as deadweight. Wife as hero. Nothing in between. For half a second, I thought about defending myself. Explaining how things had been messy, complicated, filled with tenderness even as we came apart. But I could see it in their faces, these people had chosen their version of events long ago. "My mother died building something that will outlast all of us," Ryan declared, his voice swelling with conviction. "She deserved a husband who would lift her higher, not one who chained her to mediocrity." The chapel fell still. The silence was heavier than stone. 200 pairs of eyes pressed down on me, judgment thick in the air. Part of me wanted to get up, walk out, let them have their story. But the part that had once adored Claudia Chen, the part that still did, in some stubborn corner of my heart, wouldn't let me be chased from her last farewell. "Are you done?" I asked quietly. Surprise flickered in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to still be standing. He'd wanted me to crumble, to slink out like a beaten dog. I held his gaze. "I loved your mother for 40 years, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the hushed chapel. 22 of those years as her husband. 18 more as a man who still wished her well, despite everything that went wrong between us. I'm not here to claim anything. I'm not here to rewrite the past. I'm here because once upon a time, she and I made promises to each other, and I choose to honor those promises in memory, if nothing else." I sat back down, folding my hands in my lap. Around me, the silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Ryan stood frozen, caught off guard that his father hadn't collapsed under the weight of his accusations. "The service will begin in 5 minutes, the funeral director announced briskly, stepping to the front with professional urgency. Order needed to be restored. Ryan's expression hardened into open contempt. He shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass, then strode to the front pew reserved for family. Whispered judgments buzzed in the air behind him, the nerve of that man. Poor Ryan, having to endure this. He should have stayed home. I stayed. I sat through the eulogy that painted Claudia as a trailblazer who carved her way through obstacles. I sat through speeches from associates who praised her as a visionary. I listened to music chosen to highlight triumph, not tragedy. And when it ended, I watched the line of mourners file past Ryan, offering him condolences, brushing past me like I was invisible. Only when the chapel had nearly emptied did I finally stand. I was reaching for my jacket when I heard a voice behind me. "Mr. Hartman." A man in an immaculate suit approached, briefcase in hand. Mid-50s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the air of someone used to dealing with big accounts and bigger egos. "Richard Doyle," he said, offering a hand. "Doyle and Carter LLP. I am sorry for your loss." I shook his hand, firm grip meeting firm grip. "Thank you." The service was fitting. She would have liked it. "Indeed," Doyle replied. "She left very clear instructions for how she wanted to be remembered." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "There are some matters we need to discuss concerning Mrs. Hartman's estate. I would like you and Ryan to join me at my office for the reading of her will." Before I could respond, Ryan appeared at my side, mask of grief snapping into sharp alertness. "Dan, finally. I was wondering when we'd get to the business part of this." "Of course, Ryan," Doyle said smoothly. "These matters require care. Both of you are named, and both of you are required to attend." "Both?" Ryan's eyebrows shot up. "Is that really necessary?" "I mean, he's not," he waved toward me, dismissive. "Your father is explicitly mentioned in the will, Ryan," Doyle interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "His presence is not optional. It is required by law." The words hit me like a jolt. Named in the will. It seemed impossible that Claudia had left me anything meaningful. If my name appeared in her will, I figured it was just some legal formality, maybe forgiving an old debt, maybe a line confirming I had no claim to what she'd built after we split. "I really do not think my presence is necessary," I told Doyle, keeping my voice even. "Surely this is just paperwork. You do not need me there." Dan's eyes locked on mine. His tone carried weight. "I am afraid I do, Mr. Hartman. Mrs. Hartman was very precise about who must be present. Both you and Ryan are required." Something in the way he said it told me this was not up for debate. Ryan gave an annoyed little shrug, as if even the inconvenience of sharing oxygen with me was too much. "Fine. Let's just get this over with." He turned, eyes narrowing in impatience. "Try not to make this harder than it needs to be." The three of us walked together toward his office, 3 blocks through downtown Fort Worth. The streets carried history, old brick buildings that had watched the town boom and struggle with the energy industry over the decades. Doyle filled the silence with practiced small talk, remarks about the weather, the turnout at the service. His words felt polished, deliberately neutral. Nothing in his voice gave away what lay ahead. His office sat on the top floor of a restored brick office, the kind of place that seemed to breathe quiet authority. Inside, the space smelled faintly of leather and old books. Dark wood paneled the walls. Diplomas and certificates hung in neat rows, interrupted by photos of Doyle shaking hands with local politicians and business leaders. It was exactly the sort of office Claudia would have respected, prestigious, established, traditional without being flashy. "Please, have a seat." Doyle gestured toward two leather chairs in front of his heavy mahogany desk. Ryan slid into the one closest to him, leaving me the chair slightly off to the side. That felt about right, on the margins, like I had been for the past 14 years. Doyle lowered himself into his chair, pulled open a thick file folder, and laid out a stack of documents with the careful hands of a man who had done this ritual 1,000 times. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust motes swirling in the beam like tiny spirits hovering above us. "Before we begin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "allow me to once again offer my condolences. Claudia was not just a valued client but also a personal friend. Her passing is a loss felt deeply by all who knew her." Ryan nodded solemnly, like a man accepting applause. I stayed silent, unsure what response was expected of me, or if any response could even fit. Doyle lifted the first document. Several pages were bound in a blue cover, the edges neatly tabbed. He cleared his throat, settling into a formal cadence that belonged to courtrooms and probate hearings. "This is the last will and testament of Claudia Elizabeth Hartman," he read, "executed on December 16, 2023, and properly witnessed in accordance with the laws of the state of Texas. This will revokes all previous wills and codicils. December of 2023. 17 months ago." My mind turned that date over. What had pushed Claudia to update her will so recently? Had she known something about her health? Or had some event forced her to think about the possibility of dying? "The will confirms that Mrs. Hartman was of sound mind and disposing memory at the time of its creation," Doyle continued, his voice steady, "and that she acted without undue influence or coercion." Ryan leaned forward, hands clasped, anticipation written across his body. He looked like a man ready to claim his prize, ready to step into the empire his mother had carefully built for him. Doyle flipped to the next page, the sunlight glinting off his glasses. His tone remained calm, professional, almost clinical. "I hereby make the following specific bequests and devises," he read. "To my beloved son, Ryan Alexander Hartman, I leave the family residence at 847 Preston Road, together with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained within." Ryan's lips curled into a satisfied smile. The Hillrest house alone was worth close to $800,000. Add in the furnishings and art, and it was a treasure chest of wealth and status. Additionally, Doyle went on, I leave to Ryan Alexander Hartman the sum of $500,000, to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate. $500,000 in cash, plus the house. I watched Ryan's face carefully. He was pleased, of course, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the math running in his head. Yes, this was a substantial inheritance. But Claudia's empire was worth far more than that. Where was the rest? Where was the company? That is wonderful news, of course, Ryan said, his voice trying to hide the thread of uncertainty. But what about my mother's business interests? What about the company? Doyle lifted another sheet of paper, expression still neutral. I am continuing with the specific bequests, Ryan. Please allow me to finish. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, feeling like an interloper in a moment that belonged to them. $500,000 was more money than I'd ever seen in my lifetime. Combined with the house, Ryan's inheritance would keep him comfortable for years. It felt natural, expected. He was her son, her chosen heir, the one she had trained for this world. But Doyle wasn't finished. The bequest to Ryan Alexander Hartman, he continued, is subject to the following conditions. The inheritance is contingent upon his continued employment with Hartman Global Strategies for a period of no less than 2 years from the date of this will's execution, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved. Ryan's face shifted for the first time that afternoon. Genuine confusion crept in, cracking that confident mask he wore like armor. Conditions? What kind of conditions? And what's this about selling the company? Who would ever sell it? Doyle's voice stayed calm, almost detached. I am simply reading your mother's words, Ryan. These provisions are exactly as she set them down. A tension I hadn't noticed before settled into the room like smoke. Ryan leaned forward, his body stiff, his hands curling into fists then relaxing again in his lap. I caught myself leaning in too, despite every intention to stay on the edges of this moment. "Let me make sure I'm hearing this correctly," Ryan said, his voice sharpening, carrying the same edge I'd heard when he confronted me at the chapel. "I get the house and $500,000, but it comes with strings attached? And you're telling me there's a possibility of the company being sold? That doesn't make any sense. Mom would never sell her company, it was her life's work." Doyle slowly removed his glasses and polished the lenses with deliberate care. The pause gave us all time to absorb what had just been said. When he slipped them back on, he looked at both of us, and there was something in his expression, measured, careful, almost heavy, that made my stomach knot. "Your mother's will includes additional provisions regarding the remainder of her estate," he said softly. "Those include her company, her investments, and several other significant holdings." Ryan's patience was gone. He slammed his palm lightly against the armrest. "Then stop circling it and read the damn thing. What are these other provisions?" The unease I felt only grew. Doyle's tone, the way he chose every word like it carried fragile weight, reminded me of doctors preparing to tell families the bad news. It was the sound of someone about to drop a truth that would change everything. "Before I go on," Doyle said, easing back into his chair, "I want to make something clear. These documents are the result of long discussions and careful consideration." Mrs. Hartman was firm, adamant, about what she wanted. Nothing here was accidental or hasty. The office grew so still that I could hear the ticking of the old clock on his bookshelf. Ryan sat rigid, his face clouded with alarm, while I sat wondering why Claudia had insisted I be present at all. I had thought this was just a formality. Clearly, it was something much bigger. Doyle lifted another page of the will. He glanced at it, then raised his eyes to me for the first time since we had entered the office. His gaze carried sympathy wrapped in duty, the look of a man bound to deliver a message he knew would shake the ground under my feet. "Mrs. Hartman made provisions for her remaining assets," he said, his voice heavier now, "which make up the majority of her estate." Ryan leaned so far forward he looked ready to spring from his chair. His knuckles whitened against the armrests. "Finally. Let's hear it, the company, the portfolio, all of it." Doyle cleared his throat, a deliberate pause, then spoke the words that detonated the room. "To my former husband, Michael Jonathan Hartman, I bequeath the sum of $44.6 million, to be transferred from my investment accounts and securities portfolio." The air in the office felt electrified. My mouth fell open before I could stop it. The number didn't seem real. $44.5 million. That kind of money belonged in newspapers, in stories about people who won the lottery, not to an aging man sitting in a lawyer's office in Fort Worth, Texas. "There must be a mistake," I managed, my own voice sounding distant and hollow to my ears. "Did you just say 44 million? 44.6 million? Yes." Doyle's tone remained steady, professional, but I saw the way his eyes flicked between us, watching like a referee bracing for a fight. Across from me, Ryan's face went pale, then flushed red, his whole body caught between rage and disbelief. "What did you just say?" he spat. Doyle didn't stop. His voice pressed forward with grim finality. "In addition, I transfer to Michael Hartman controlling interest in Hartman Global Strategies, along with all subsidiary companies, real estate, and business assets. This includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities and appointment as chairman of the board of directors." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Air caught in my lungs and refused to move. The empire I'd watched Claudia build, the company that had consumed her, that had broken us apart, was suddenly being handed to me. This cannot be right," I whispered. "There has to be some mistake. Some error in the paperwork." Doyle slowly took off his glasses again, cleaning them with that same careful precision. "I assure you, Mr. Hartman, there is no mistake. These documents were prepared under Mrs. Hartman's direct supervision. She reviewed every word herself, multiple times. These were her exact wishes." Ryan shot to his feet so violently his chair rolled back and slammed into the wall. His face burned crimson, his hands shaking with fury. "This is impossible. She would not do this. She could not. Ryan turned on me like a man staring into a nightmare he could not escape. His eyes were wild, disbelief tangled with something darker, rage. What did you do? How did you twist her against me? I shook my head, my voice barely finding its way out. I did nothing. I have not spoken to your mother in 14 years. 14 years, he snapped, the word exploding like a gunshot. Nobody leaves $44 million to an ex-husband after a decade and a half of silence. You got to her somehow, you must have wormed your way back in when she was weak, when her mind was failing. Before his hysteria could spiral further, Dan cut through the room with the cool authority of a man used to corralling chaos. I can assure you, Ryan, your mother was of sound mind. She underwent a full mental competency evaluation precisely to prevent accusations like this. I sat rooted to the chair, dazed. $44.5 million. Controlling interest in a company worth more than the GDP of small towns. It felt less like money and more like fiction, as if I had somehow stepped into the wrong story. Why? The word escaped me without thought. Why would she do this? Dan gathered the documents neatly, aligning the edges with deliberate care, as though order could contain the storm. Mrs. Hartman anticipated that very question. She left specific instructions, Mr. Hartman, along with a personal message meant for you. Ryan's face twisted, red with fury. A personal message? She left him a message, but cut me out of the heart of everything? Out of her company? Her life's work? You have not been cut out, Dan said evenly. You inherited the Preston Road property and $500,000. That is no small legacy. It represents more than most men will ever see. Do not insult me. Ryan's finger jabbed toward me, his hand trembling. Compared to what he gets? You are talking about hundreds of millions in assets. The company alone is worth more than everything else combined. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. My own life, my quiet, threadbare life, had been obliterated in a matter of sentences. Yet all I could think about was the impossible truth that Claudia, who had once despised me for my smallness, had left me everything. This is fraud. Ryan suddenly roared, his voice breaking. Fraud. Manipulation. She was coerced, compromised. You. He spun on me, his face contorted with disbelief and hatred. You did something to her. You poisoned her mind. Admit it. I shrank back, my heart pounding in my throat. Ryan, I swear, I never spoke to your mother. I did not even know she was sick. Liar. His palm came down hard on Dan's polished desk, scattering papers like startled birds. No one gives away an empire to a man who abandoned his family. To a man who could not be bothered to call when she was dying. She did not abandon anyone, I said softly, though my voice found strength as it went. Our marriage ended, yes. But ending a marriage does not erase everything. It means exactly that. Ryan's voice cracked into a shriek. You walked out. You took your pathetic settlement and disappeared into your pathetic life while she was building something monumental. And now I am supposed to believe she just handed it back to you? Dan's voice thundered, a rare crack in his professional veneer. Mr. Hartman, enough. These were your mother's wishes, executed with absolute clarity and legality. She was not confused. She was not vulnerable. She knew precisely what she wanted. But Ryan was spiraling, unable to stop. He pointed at Doyle with wild eyes. I want everything examined. Every document, every medical test, every email. I want to know if he contacted her, if he schemed, if he planted this. There were no contacts, Dan said firmly. Mrs. Hartman was clear on that point. And she explained her decision in detail. The word explain sliced through the air like a blade. Ryan let out a bitter laugh that rattled the bookshelves. She explained herself to him. To the man who ruined her marriage. She left him her reasons but left me with nothing but scraps. Dan nodded once. Yes. She left him a message. In her own hand. That word, father, seemed to hit Ryan like a blow to the ribs. For one raw second, his fury gave way, and I glimpsed something else buried beneath, hurt, betrayal, a wound deeper than money. But it flickered and vanished, replaced by rage twice as hot. "He is not my father," Ryan spat. "My father would have stood by her. My father would have lifted her higher, not dragged her down. He turned back to me, trembling with venom. "You are nothing but a failure of a man, too small for the life she tried to live." The words cut deep, not because they were lies, but because they carried shards of truth. I had felt small in those years. I had struggled against her success. I had resented what it did to us. "Maybe you are right," I whispered. "Maybe I was not the husband she deserved. But I never asked for this. I never expected this." "Expected?" Ryan's voice cracked upward, hysteria raw in his throat. "You orchestrated this. You found a way to twist her when she was weak, when she was afraid." "That is enough," Dan barked, his composure fraying for the first time. "Your mother was not weak. She was sharper, more resolute than ever when she signed these papers." Ryan's fury faltered, and for the first time his voice trembled. "Then why?" he demanded, his face breaking. "Why would she do this to me? I was everything she wanted. I became what she shaped me to be. I gave her my loyalty. I worked in her company. I followed her every step. I lived the life she mapped out for me. I became the son she wanted, the son she could point to with pride." The crack in Ryan's voice cut through my own disbelief like a knife. For the first time, beneath all the bitterness, I saw the truth of him, a man who had spent decades chasing his mother's approval, only to have her ultimate validation fall into someone else's hands. Dan folded his hands over the papers. His voice softened. "She left a message explaining her reasoning. Would you like me to read it?" Ryan's entire frame trembled, his hands twitching as if barely holding back an earthquake inside him. "A message," he spat. "She couldn't say it to my face, but she left him." He jabbed a finger toward me, shaking. "She left him a message." Dan shook his head gently. "It was meant for both of you. Mrs. Hartman asked me to share it after the will was read." I cleared my throat, my voice scratchy, unsteady. Maybe we should hear what she wanted us to know." Ryan turned his eyes on me, pure hatred burning there. "You don't get to decide anything. You don't belong here. You don't deserve any of this." Yet behind the fury, I caught something else flickering, a desperate hunger to understand. Dan reached for a manila envelope, its flap sealed and labeled in Claudia's unmistakable handwriting, "Personal message." He held it up, commanding the silence like a judge restoring order to a courtroom. "Enough. Both of you." His voice sliced clean through the tension. "Before another word is spoken, you need to hear this." He broke the seal with slow precision and withdrew several pages of cream-colored stationery, unfolding them with the care of someone holding more than paper. The room seemed to shrink, every sound swallowed by the weight of what was about to be revealed. Dan began to read. "My dearest Michael. If these words are being read, it means I am gone. And you are probably sitting in Dan's office, convinced the whole world has lost its mind. I can see your face right now, that same puzzled expression you used to wear whenever I'd rearrange the living room furniture without asking. Confused, but trying to be polite about it. Despite the tears stinging my eyes, I felt my mouth curve into the ghost of a smile. She had painted the picture perfectly. And through Dan's voice, it almost felt like she was in the room again. I know this inheritance must feel like a mistake. I know you are thinking you never wanted this, never earned it, that you don't deserve it. But Michael, you do. Every penny, every ounce of responsibility. And I want you to know why." Dan glanced up briefly, then continued. "I never stopped loving you. Not during our ugliest fights. Not through the divorce papers. Not through 14 years of silence. I was furious with you for not understanding my ambitions, yes. But I was even more furious with myself, for choosing those ambitions over us. You begged me to remember balance, to protect what mattered. I was too proud, too stubborn, and too afraid to listen." Her words hit like blows to the chest, shattering years of guilt I had carried alone. Hot tears ran down my cheeks as I listened to the impossible truth. She had seen me all along. Then Dan read Ryan's name, and my son's head snapped up. Ryan, my brilliant, beautiful boy. I know you are furious. You probably believe your father tricked me, but that is not the truth. The truth is, you are not ready for what this kind of wealth brings. Not yet. Ryan's face drained, then flushed crimson, emotions chasing each other too fast to pin down. You have lived inside my shadow, enjoying the benefits of success without ever feeling the weight of responsibility. You have never built something from the ground up. You have never been forced to choose between ambition and love. And most painful of all, you have spent 14 years despising a good man for sins he never committed. That's not true, Ryan whispered, but his voice was thin, collapsing under the weight of her words. Michael taught me about character, about integrity, about the kind of strength that does not announce itself through cruelty or judgment. I forgot those lessons when I put business above love. But I never forgot the man who taught them to me. By now I was openly sobbing, and I did not care. Her words poured through me like water into dry ground, filling places inside me I thought had long turned to dust. Ryan, you have been given enough to live comfortably, enough to find yourself without the trap of unlimited wealth. Use it wisely. Build something of your own. Learn to cherish people above profit. And most of all, learn to forgive your father for being human, flawed, and imperfect. Ryan let out a sound, half growl, half wounded cry, that shook the air. I could not tell if it was anger or heartbreak. Michael, what I leave you is not just money. It is the chance to do what I failed to do, to use wealth as a tool for good, not as a weapon to prove worth. I trust you, precisely because you never wanted this, because you will never wield it to harm. I trust you to carry what I could not. Dan's voice carried her final lines, practical matters of arrangements and quiet hopes for us both, but I barely heard them. My heart was beating too loud, my tears falling too fast. In that room, through those pages, Claudia was with us again. Explaining. Apologizing. Loving. The message could not have been clearer. Claudia had chosen love over entitlement, principle over expectation, and wisdom over sheer wealth. When Dan's voice finally fell silent, the entire office felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I sat there with tears drying on my cheeks, stunned by the knowledge that Claudia had carried love for me all the way to her final breath. Across from me, Ryan stared at the floor, his world collapsing piece by piece. Dan folded the pages with care, slid them back into the envelope, and pushed it gently toward me. She wanted you to have the original, Michael. This letter is yours to keep. My hands trembled as I reached for it. That envelope wasn't just paper, it was the last conversation I would ever have with the woman who had defined my life in ways both beautiful and brutal. I pressed it against my chest, feeling the weight of her words settle into me like dust after a demolition. For several minutes, none of us spoke. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the old clock on Dan's shelf. I sat with her letter pressed close, realizing her final gift wasn't just money, it was the return of my worth, not only in her eyes, but finally in my own. Ryan broke the silence first. His voice came out low, stripped of fire, but still carrying the edge of defiance. This isn't over. I can contest it. Mental incapacity. Coercion. Fraud. There are ways to fight a will. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since we'd stepped into this office. I didn't see a powerful man or a worthy heir. I saw a boy who had spent his whole life demanding the world bend to him, without ever realizing that love isn't inherited, it's earned. You could try, I said softly. But your mother was right, Ryan. You're not ready for this kind of responsibility. His laugh was bitter and hollow. And you are? You're nothing, Dad. A retired power station worker. No business background. No network. No clue what it takes to run a company worth hundreds of millions. For a heartbeat, the old Michael almost agreed with him, the Michael who had spent 2 decades feeling small in Claudia's shadow. But then her words echoed back, you deserve every penny. Maybe you're right, I said, rising slowly from my chair. Maybe I don't know the first thing about running an empire. But I know something your mother valued more than business acumen. He narrowed his eyes. And what's that? I know the difference between serving myself and serving others. Ryan's face twisted with a final flash of rage. This is madness. She was old. She was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. Dan's tone cut through the tension, firm and final. Your mother was 62 years old and in excellent mental health. She submitted to extensive psychological evaluations to prevent exactly the kind of challenge you're threatening. Her decision was deliberate, Ryan. It was crystal clear. Then why? Ryan's voice cracked, boyish and raw. Why would she do this to me? I was everything she wanted. I lived her plan. I gave her everything. Something in me softened. Despite his fury, despite the cruelty he'd shown me, he was still my son, and I could feel the weight of his wound. She didn't do this to you, Ryan, I said gently. She did it for you. She wanted you to discover who you are when you're not living under the shadow of wealth. His fists clenched. I don't want that chance. I want what's mine. What's yours, I replied evenly, is $500,000 and a house worth nearly $1 million more. That is more than most people ever see in a lifetime. What you believed was owed to you, was never yours to begin with. For the first time, Ryan hesitated. He stared at me, and I saw the recognition flicker, an understanding that something had shifted permanently. The father he'd mocked, the man he'd humiliated in front of 200 mourners, wasn't standing here begging for scraps of respect anymore. You think you've won, he muttered, yanking his coat from the chair. His hands shook as he pulled it on. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I said, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. It makes me responsible. He stopped at the door, suddenly smaller than the man who had marched into the office so sure of his inheritance. This isn't finished. Yes, it is, I answered quietly. It ended the moment your mother made her choice. What happens now depends on how you choose to live the life she's left you. He didn't reply. He just opened the door and walked out, letting it close softly behind him. Dan exhaled, adjusting the stack of documents on his desk, the rustle of paper pulling us back into the practical world. There will be transfers to arrange, accounts to manage, board meetings to schedule. The current management team is strong, and they'll help you transition into your new role. I nodded slowly, the enormity still sinking in. Then I asked the one question that had been clawing at me since the letter was read. Dan, did she really love me, even after everything that happened between us? For the first time all day, Dan smiled, warm and genuine. Michael, she mentioned you every time we met. Not the divorce, not the fights, not the mistakes. She talked about the man who taught her that success without character is nothing but expensive failure. When I walked out of that office, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air sharper, as if the whole world had been washed clean. I had work ahead of me, responsibilities to shoulder, a company to understand, a future to shape. But for the first time in 14 years, I felt ready. Justice, I realized, isn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It is about recognition. Recognition that character outlasts credentials. That patience outlives entitlement. And that love, real love, never dies. Claudia had seen that. And in her final act, she had given me the chance to prove her right. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.